Okay, perfect. Well, good morning and welcome to everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. And to those of you that joined us extra early this morning when I accidentally started the webinar quite a bit earlier. So welcome. From everyone on David's team, we just want to extend our gratitude to each and every one of you for joining us today. As many of you may know, David has more than 40 years of experience as a family therapist, workshop facilitator, lecturer, and advisor to leadership executives from all over the world. He has dedicated his life to helping leaders create more accountable and authentic organizations and is a best-selling author and respected thought leader in the leadership community. David is so passionate about helping people connect with the most authentic versions of themselves and seeing the world transform one authentic person at a time. Whether he's leading an academy, speaking in a webinar, sharing with a crowd, or through his written words, David is inspired and fulfilled by the work that he does. Today's topic of psychological safety is one that is so crucial for creating authentic and high-performing workplaces. So today, David's going to share some insights and strategies to help us be more mindful about creating safe and respectful workplaces and how we co-create the kind of culture that we desire. This webinar is being recorded and it will be available on YouTube along with all of David's other webinars. I will share the link to that in the chat room if anyone would like to go visit that. And so again, just thank you so much for joining us this morning. We're really looking forward to the webinar and the Q&A session, the chat that we'll share after the presentation. So without further ado, here is David.
Thank you, Kristen. So appreciate you being here. I know we've missed you the last few months, last few webinars, and so it's always good to have your presence back. It's wonderful. And thank you, everybody, for showing up this morning, for taking time out of your busy day to spend an hour with me. So here's how it works. For those of you who have been around, come regularly to these monthly webinars, you know this, but I will talk for about an hour, and then I'll stay on for an extra half an hour for Q&A. Some people have to jump off, no problem. But if you can stay, we'll unmute you, we'll turn off the recording, and they'll have an opportunity for some good dialogue. And what I find is there's just a really nice community that's being built here and some regulars that come each month. So if you're new, feel free to join us. If you've been around for a while, obviously feel free to join us. So folks, we're going to do three things today. I'm going to talk about the what and the why of psychological safety. I'm assuming that all of you have been exposed to this terminology, this language, but I'll give some review, some rationale about what exactly it is from my perspective. I'll talk about strategies for building psychological safety, and then I will talk about strategies when you don't feel safe, if you're in an environment that you don't feel safe in. And you can apply this, frankly, to your workplace, to a family relationship, personal relationship, community, no matter where you are. You can adapt this to a wide variety of organizations or cultures that you might be involved in. So I hope you'll find it relevant, stimulating, and useful. And my whole notion here is that it isn't just up to the boss. We co-create a culture. You know, I often say that the ultimate act of accountability is to realize that we're actually complaining about the culture that we are co-creating. So, it's very easy to blame. It's very easy to look outside yourself. It's very easy as you go through this. Many of us will say, you can think of all the people that you wish were here listening to this. And what I'd like you to do is to resist that tendency, it's a human tendency, and to look instead of outside with your finger pointed, blaming, but to recognize, look in the mirror and look at what you can do to make your culture safer, regardless of what that culture is. It might be a culture of perhaps you're in the work of service, whether or not you have a title or not. Maybe it's your relationship with your clients, with your customers. We're all in relationships. And as I often have heard people say over the years, my life would be a whole lot easier if it wasn't for other people. So my hope is that you'll learn something about yourself, that you can bring that self more fully and courageously into those relationships. So just to let you know, just to follow up, I've been in the leadership development field now for 35 years. This is a cross section of some of the organizations I've worked with in recent years. And as Kristen said, so I've done a lot of thinking about this whole notion of psychological safety. However, I really didn't use that terminology until I came across Amy Edmondson, who wrote a book in 2018 called The Fearless Organization. I didn't really use the word psychological safety until it was affirmed for me. This is really what I've been doing. I just didn't use that language. So I give credit to Amy and her amazing work to introduce the whole concept of psychological safety. If you want to get more deeply into this material, I'd certainly recommend her work. And then Tim Clark talks about psychological safety really from an organizational perspective. So you really have three levels here. You have the personal level, you have an interpersonal level, and an organizational level. And Tim's work is really the stage. If you want to go into the organization and build a psychologically safe organization, build proper systems, structure, all of that is imperative to build a system of organizational psychological safety. And if you want to really build and work with your culture, feel free to reach out to me, and I'd give you any kind of help and support, or you can reach out and at least have a look at Tim's work. But today we're going to be focusing really on the personal and the interpersonal, so that it'll be very, very relevant. Whether you have a title or not, it'll be relevant for you in your life, no matter where you are. So I'll tell you where the whole notion began. Those of you who have heard me talk know that I recognize my parents. I appreciate my parents. And I'm going to share with you what it was like to grow up in my home. And this is where the seeds of this were really planted in my family. As you know, as I say, most of us lead the way that we were parented. And if we lead better than the way we were parented, it just means you've done some work on yourself. But by default, we will tend to lean toward and gravitate toward what we've learned growing up in those early informative years. And you all know that those of you who heard me talk know that I had wonderful parents. They were supportive, they were caring, they were encouraging, they were wise. And I grew up in a family that was not safe. My dad struggled with mental illness. He was hospitalized on more than one occasion. And my mom struggled with rage. She was a rageaholic. And the interesting thing is, I wouldn't have used at the time psychological safety, but I was really all the concepts that I'm going to be sharing with you today were really implanted in me from my upbringing. And so there was a sense of constant anxiety that I had. And, my mom would only probably lose her temper maybe once a month. But the interesting thing is that when you live in a family, and it was like an alcoholic family, except there wasn't any alcohol in our family, but it was that instability, that volatility, and you were always on guard, wondering when the next shoe was going to drop. And it's like mom never scheduled her rages, so you live in it constantly, not wondering, when is the next one going to happen? And so you're continually on guard in what we call this notion of being activated all the time. I had this constant anxiety. And then I never knew Dad would be very caring and loving when he was on, but then he would go off. And then I would, and I was responsible for getting him often to the hospitals that he needed to be admitted to. And so there's this constant sense of anxiety, and it was like a motor that was running in me, and that anxiety persisted. It's like when you get exposed to trauma, and I won't go into the details, but just know that the trauma that I lived in created this engine in me, and that engine of anxiety was what fueled my business, what fueled my life. And I got into running, and I ran obsessively, and it was like this constant engine, if you will. And I got a lot of societal reinforcement for it, but the reality of it is that I never really felt safe. And so as I went back and did healing with my parents, and I have to tell you that I don't think until you can come to really be grateful for what you had growing up, you really can't realize your potential in your leadership or in your life. to go back and face this. And then I was also involved in a very fundamentalist religion where I was taught that the more perfect you are, the more effort you put into your life, the better off you were, the more worth you had. So I based my worth on performance. And it just was this perfect storm to be recognized. And I just kept driving and pushing myself in this area. But what the reality of it is, I didn't feel safe within myself. And so I remember my first job, and I walked into that job, and I was constantly on edge, and I never felt safe. And it was on me because I had actually a really good boss, but I didn't see her as a good boss. I saw her as a person that was like my mother, and I was afraid, and I was trying to measure up to all her expectations. Now, sometimes it is on the boss, but I'm suggesting that we first of all look within ourselves if we don't feel safe. And where is that coming from? And so I'm going to give you some strategies later on. What I began to understand as I've gone back and understood my parents, my mother lost her first husband in the war. She was grieving, still grieving, and there was no resources to help her with that. So she had walled up, and she lived in a very abusive family. Her upbringing was very abusive. And she was grieving the loss of a stillborn baby when I was 14 months old. She had a baby immediately after I was, she got pregnant immediately after I was born. And so there was all this going on for my mother. And of course, I thought it was something that I was doing wrong. But when I begin to understand my parents from their perspective, I begin to heal. And a big part of creating psychologically safe organizations is for people to begin to take responsibility, to look at their own past and to say, hey, where am I contributing to this culture that I don't feel safe in? Now, I'm not in any way abdicating good leadership, because that's imperative as well. And we're going to cover both ends, but this is where it's a shared responsibility. We co-create this culture. You cannot not contribute to the culture that you live in. So we have this notion that it's up to the boss, right, to do it for us, to create this safe environment. And if you have a position of leadership, you have some responsibilities, but it's not all on you. That's my point. So I'm going to give you my definition of psychological safety. Being who you are is recognized, respected, and valued. This is my own definition of psychological safety. I just want you to think for a moment about a relationship, either at work or in your personal life, where you did not feel safe to be who you are. What was that like? And you spend energy protecting instead of engaging. There's no way, if we create together a culture that's not safe, and then we hand out employee engagement surveys, there's no way that you're going to get an engaging culture if people are protecting themselves. And there's actually a biological reason for that, which is what I want to go into. So this is my purpose. I inspire possibilities by connecting people to their true nature and expressing it consciously in their work and in their life. It's creating a place where, and this is, for those of you who are interested in going deeper into this work, my follow-up workshops really help people connect with that true nature. You don't have to change yourself. You need to come home to yourself, and this changes everything. And so this is about coming home. What does it really mean to come home to yourself? This is the place many of us don't feel safe because we've never been raised in an environment that helped us feel safe with being home with yourself and being comfortable with yourself. Those leaders that you respect, the people on your team that you respect, are people who are at home with themselves. They may not even know that they're at home with themselves, but when you're at peace with yourself, this is where everything stems from. Everything starts there. As the painter Picasso said, I wake up depressed every day and I start painting and the depression lifts. I, who have struggled with I inherited some of my dad's propensity toward depression, understand today that depression for me is one of the indicators that I'm out of my home, and that when I come back to myself, the depression lifts. And so it can actually be a guide. What do you have to do every day to come home to yourself? These are the questions that I begin to ask, and we've delved much more deeply. But the result of this is that we create unsafe workplaces when we're not at home with ourselves. So here's a few behaviors that I see in workplaces that indicate a lack of safety or indicate the issue related to psychological safety. There's a fear of being ridiculed for speaking up in meetings or discussions, reluctance to propose new ideas or solutions due to the fear of backlash, overly controlling behavior from managers who restrict independence and trust, the fear of being fired so you don't say no to extra work piled on you and you're working 12 hours a day in an attempt to keep up. Then you throw devices onto that and technology onto that where we're accessible 24/7 and we're burning people out. It's a fear of being ostracized for setting boundaries or for saying no, being marginalized directly, fear of expressing concerns or going against the culture norms, or direct harassment, psychological, physical, or sexual harassment, where we just simply have boundaries crossed. These are issues related to psychological safety. So what I want to do, first of all, is I want to share with you the biology of psychological safety. And for those of you who have a medical background, I'm going to really oversimplify this. I'm not a medical person, but I just want to help you begin to understand that a lot of this psychological safety is actually biology. It's biological. It's not just psychological. I took a course from a cellular biologist just before the pandemic on leadership, on the biology of leadership. And basically what I learned was that cells in the human body have two purposes. They protect or they grow. And you can't grow if you're trying to protect, and you can't protect if you're trying to grow. You can't do both, but cells need to do both, or you will die. You get cancer from cells that are unable to protect that particular organism that's growing in you. So it's this balance continually. And from a brain perspective, we call it the difference between a wizard brain and the lizard brain. There's two aspects of your brain that need attention at this point. The wizard brain is the part of your brain that helps you grow, and the lizard brain is the part of your brain that protects you, that will help you survive. And these two have to be acting, but they can't act simultaneously. You can't be in one part of your brain, and you can't be in both parts of your brain. You're either in one part or another. So just for a moment, I want you to we'll just do this little experiment. What I'd like you to do is to think of a project that you're currently working on in your workplace or in your personal life that requires some creative thinking, some planning, some fostering trust, some collaboration with others, some engagement. That is required. You're in your wizard brain to do all that. Now, I'm just going to tell you a personal experience here that happened to me last spring. Is that I'm walking my dogs down in our nature conservancy before we moved behind our home. And I'm kind of preoccupied with this project that I've got going on in my work, and I'm thinking and I'm planning and how am I going to do this? And I'm engaged heavily in this, and my wizard brain is firing in all cylinders, if you will. Suddenly I heard a rustling in the bushes, and a bear right in front of me was running toward me. What had happened was the dogs had chased this bear coming right toward me. Now, in that moment, I can assure you, I was not creatively thinking. I wasn't planning. I wasn't getting involved in any of those activities. I immediately went to my lizard brain. Why? Because my brain automatically says, above all, we're going to protect you. You would not be here today if the lizard brain wasn't active in your mind. Now, it's an interesting thing. That bear ran right past me. He was very friendly. He was scared, and he climbed a tree. So once things settled down, I got a picture of him. There's the bear that was after me. He wasn't after me. He was just happened to be coming toward. But you tell when he's coming towards you, you cannot convince your brain he's not coming towards you, and that the brain will always err on the side of protection. Far better to have it be wrong and safe than right and not safe. So the whole point that I'm trying to suggest here is that there's an F state in the lizard brain that you get activated, and the C state in the wizard brain. And it's important to understand that when we're activated, it's a fight, flight, freeze, and more recently in the psychology literature, there's a notion of fawn as well. It's a response to stress where we take care of everybody and we go into enabling. And we see this in alcoholic families where you have an enabler of the alcoholic, and they go into taking care of everybody. And that becomes their role, but it actually has nothing to do with, it looks caring, but it's not caring at all. It comes from emptiness. And it comes from what we call fawning, which is about pleasing people, which is very different than caring about people. It looks the same, but it's very different underneath, versus a C state. So we're going to get into this in a little bit more detail, because in order to create a psychologically safe organization, we have to function within the C state. The F state is a natural biological response. We're all going to get there. We just can't live there, and we certainly can't lead there. So what happens is if you're in a chronic F state, and this is what I often will see in organizations, and I see it in organizations because I've seen it in myself. I know it in myself. I lived in a chronic F state for years and didn't even know it until I began to do this healing work and began to step back. And I was getting all kinds of recognition from the society. Hey, I'm running fast races. I'm, athletic. I'm building this successful business. But underneath it was this chronic F state that was unacknowledged: frustration, restlessness, wound up, on edge, difficulty concentrating, irritability, impatience, tension, chronic inflammation, fatigue, body pain, joints and in the muscles, gastrointestinal issues, depression and anxiety, memory loss, sleep disturbances, skin issues, over control. And this is often what we see, are these irritable, over controlling bosses that are really having unacknowledged F states, and then burnout from people pleasing because you don't know how to say no, because we're in a constant stress response. And we often actually get a lot of positive reinforcement for being in the F state, society-wise, right? So it's important for us to each look within ourselves. So I'll just give you this little chart here between the relationship between time and safety. The default state in the human body is meant to be relaxed. We're meant to be at peace with ourselves. And then we get activated, we get a stress response, we go into a perceived threat, and then we get what we call activation. And it's meant then, and in the F state, cortisol is released, heart rate increases, pupils dilate, bronchioles dilate, digestion's inhibited, bladder relaxes, liver releases glucose. This is what happens, these hormonal response to protect us. This is a biological response. If you didn't do this, if your body didn't do this, we wouldn't have survived this long. But the key is to then relax when the perceived threat is over and come back to relaxation. What happens, folks, when we stay at that activated state? We have a continual excretion of stress hormones. And what happens is we get all of these symptoms of prolonged F state behavior and F state responses in the body. Bessel van der Kolk said this, the doctor, he said, regarding unresolved stress, interferes with the brain circuits that involve focusing, flexibility, and being able to stay in emotional control. A constant sense of danger and helplessness promotes the continual secretion of stress hormones, which wreaks havoc with the immune system and the function of the body's organs. So if your immune system is disruptive, dysregulated, I can promise you that is going to expand into the world around you. You can't live in isolation from the world. So if you're in this constant state of stress all the time, that is going to impact the level of safety that people have around you. So I'm on a board of directors of an organization called Wayfinders. And what we do is we're on a working ranch. The operations team is on a working ranch, and we help first responders and veterans who have experienced PTSD in their work. And we bring them out to the ranch, not to deal with their trauma, but to create a community where they can relax and get connected with themselves. And we have a bee program. It's amazing what I've learned about bees and about myself. We have an equine program. We have an indigenous program. It's a beautiful environment. Everybody wants to get involved with this. Just get in touch with me. It's a beautiful ranch that we were leased by the Wineglass Ranch, just southwest of Cochrane here. But in the equine program, we have this assessment of how to know if a horse feels safe. And you learn about yourself through the process of working with a horse. How do you know if a horse feels safe around you? They're prey animals. So they are like I was raised. And I think one of the things that happens is when you've been raised with trauma, you become either a prey animal or a predator, where you take the trauma and you impose it onto others, or you impose it on yourself, and you become extra sensitive. And horses have a temperament like I have, in that very, very empathic, very sensitive. I could not do this work. There's a good side to that trauma that I dealt with, but unless it's dealt with and looked at and worked with and leaned into, you carry that stress with you. See, horses at least have the ability to come back to a relaxed state. There's a very fascinating book called Why Don't Zebras Get Ulcers? It's a book on stress management, and it's a fascinating process about how prey animals live in an environment and can stay relaxed in that environment. Anyway, I digress. So if you circle a horse in a paddock, what you do is you get 4 gestures that horse will begin to feel safe when they're around you. They put their ear towards you, they lick and chew, they'll lower their head, and they'll eventually make a small circle. And once they make a small circle around you, they will follow you around all day. They'll put their head on your shoulder and follow you around. It's a magic, and all horses will do this. It's magic. And any of you who have worked in detail with horses understand what I'm talking about. So how do you know if people feel safe around you? We all can say, hey, I want the people on my team to feel safe. But how do you know that? How do you measure that? Well, we could have a brainstorming session here, but basically they seek your advice. They open up with you. They bring you the bad news and they bring you the good news. Don't think that bad news, don't think that you measure psychological safety in your culture or in your relationships by the fact that people don't bring you the bad news. That's in fact a sign that, hey, I feel safe enough to challenge you. They challenge you, they get past polite, and they are genuine with you, and that you're both relaxed in that relationship. Okay. And this can just be a one-on-one relationship with anybody. These are indicators of saying these are ways that people feel safe. I've had business executives say, well, I've got an open door policy. Nobody comes in to complain. I must be good. Well, you can't use that as a measurement. You've got to be out and build connections, because you can't just assume that if people aren't talking to you, that they feel safe around you. Okay. So the one point that I want to stress here is the difference between safety versus security. Don't confuse the two. Safety is a condition, and I use this Cirque du Soleil demonstration. Safety is a condition of being protected from harm in order to achieve an acceptable standard of risk. It's an external quality. Security is a state of confidence that arises from one's capacity to face a risk. So, for example, the external in this case is, do they feel safe with the rope and the structure of that? The brain cannot tell the difference between physical safety and psychological safety. My vision is that organizations will put as much priority on psychological safety as they do on physical safety. So do the personnel feel structurally safe? Do these two people feel that they are competent with each other doing this work? That's external. The internal confidence is their own inner security while they do this, and that's on the employee. So what I say is the employer is responsible for the safety, because that's for the environment. But what goes on inside of people is on the employee. So you might be creating, as a positional leader, a safe organization. You might be doing everything I'm talking about, and people still don't feel safe because they don't feel safe with themselves. And that's not on the boss. So another way to say this is there's 3 circles in a relationship. There's a comfort zone, there's an uncomfortable zone, and there's a red zone. And psychological safety lies in the uncomfortable zone. It doesn't lie in the comfort zone. You have to get out of the comfort zone to grow. But what we're saying is, are we comfortable being uncomfortable? And that's what the work of psychological safety is. Safety is not about staying in the comfort zone, being secure, happy, coddling, making it easy, lowering your standards. Don't use psychological safety as a weapon to say, my boss can't give me feedback on my work. I don't feel safe around here. That is irresponsible. That is not what safety is. What safety is expected that I'll speak up at any time to anybody whenever I'm not feeling safe. There's a spirit of generosity and caring. I'm expected to be who I am. It's a place where I can make mistakes, to learn, to grow, and be challenged. I can fail here without being a failure. And ideas are meant to be both supported and challenged. But it's in that blue zone that we're really talking about here. So now what I want to do in the last half an hour here is I want to give you 4 strategies for building psychological safety within your organization and within any relationship. And I'll just go through these one at a time. First of all, be intentional. It's going to feel a little bit superficial, but I would encourage you to go back to your workplace and talk to your team about this notion of psychological safety. You can't just take it for granted. And you can't, if people aren't actively implying those measurements, you can't assume that there's psychological safety in a relationship. And you can go back and do this, frankly, with a significant other in your life. And I always say, have a commitment conversation. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how safe do you feel around me? You can do this with a team if you feel that there's a reasonable degree of trust. You can do this just one-on-one with people if you feel like the team isn't there. Now, people are going to say, well, they're not going to be honest with you if they don't feel safe. That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that they're honest with you at this point. What matters is that you care about whether they feel safe or not. And then to start to make your intention explicit about this. So 1, you can define 1 however you want, completely, I don't feel safe at all. And 10 means I completely feel relaxed. I can be myself around you. I just can absolutely, I feel whatever that looks like. Now, again, you don't want to define 10 as being so comfortable that you're not challenging yourself, that you're not growing together, that you're not pushing together. So I would define a 10 as I feel comfortable enough to take risks here. I feel comfortable enough to push and challenge you. I feel comfortable enough to fail and know that that's part of the learning process. And there's really no failures. There's just learning here. So you can define 10 however you want. But the thing that I would suggest is be careful of what I would say the worst number you can get is a 5, because a 5 is the safe number. It's the politically correct number. It's polite. It's the polite number. It's not too hot and it's not too cold. So you're never going to get a 1, because if people don't feel safe, they'll never be honest with you enough to be a 1. But whatever number you get, here's the response. Thank you. Thank you. Now, if you've got a large team, if you've got 30 people, have people work in small groups and come up with an average number. And just give, or you can do this anonymously if you want to pass out anonymous feedback and say, what number would you give me? But I would suggest that you be intentional around this. And whatever number you get, let's suppose you say you got a 5. Thank you. Thank you. Now, if you're getting consistently 8 or 9 on this, then it means you're doing your job. You're doing everything that I'm talking about here. And you don't have to fabricate a problem in your relationships. If you know that you're going to get an 8 or 9 and you get all of those measurements that people feel safe around you, you can feel it when you walk in. I'm relaxed, but I'm engaged. I'm taking risks. You can feel that in your culture. And I'm going to suggest if you work in a culture that you feel safe, and you will know it as a positional leader, if you start to get focused on what your inner state is, and you begin to notice what the world around you, I would just say, Don't take that for granted. Make sure you appreciate people on your team and let them know this is not a small accomplishment if you work in a safe environment. But if you want to dig this down a little deeper, get some feedback, say thank you. I have some work cut out for me and I'll need your help. Okay. Number 3, what's one thing I could do to take it up a notch in the next month? So people may not feel safe to give you a whole lot, but they'll give you a little bit. And they'll, even if it's polite, no problem. But hey, yeah, you could be out of your office a little bit more. And what you do is that you make an agreement with a request for support. I will be willing to do that. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like to listen more in this relationship. I need to pay attention more. I need to be more attentive. Be interesting to do this with a significant other in your life, to say, hey, how safe do you actually feel around me? We take it for granted. And I remember I had a guy come in for coaching. He was a senior executive, and his CEO referred me. Who said, you know what, I need to assess. And the CEO said, would you help me assess whether this person is a right person for an executive role, because he loses his temper on a regular basis. And when I asked him, how often do you lose your temper? He said, oh, it's not a big deal. Probably once a month. And then I said, do you schedule it? Do you schedule it for 3 o'clock on the last Friday of every month and let people know, stay out of you might want to not be around when I'm losing my temper. Don't take it personally. Of course not. So you only live with it for 5 minutes a month. They live with it 24/7. They live with it every time they come into work. Okay. And they may even live with it when they're at home at night, and they live with it in the middle of the night, worrying about how their boss is going to come in, what kind of mood people are going to come in the next day. Anyway, make an agreement with a request for support and intentionally work toward closing this gap and increasing the number. Number 2 is to be attentive. Now, what do I mean by being attentive? By being attentive to your inner state. And again, in my workshops, what we would do is drill more deeply into a process for going from the F state to the C state. We all get into the F state. We have on our team a language that when people are in the F state, we can acknowledge that. We can acknowledge, listen, you're there, and we support each other with that. We develop this language of being in the F state. We're all going to get there, but folks, you cannot lead from there. You will create a lack of safety if you're tense. And some of us don't even know that we're tense, again, because we've had that chronic F state. We don't even recognize it. So I use Tara Brock's process. This is one suggested process. Recognize when you're there. The most important thing is to recognize I'm in the F state. And the interesting thing is that you need the wizard brain to recognize it. And so you've got an activated lizard brain that you have to be disciplined and practiced at recognizing, hey, I'm in the F state. I need to step back. Accept and appreciate it. It's there for a reason. Don't judge it, but don't act on it. I always compare it to a child in a car seat in the back seat. If you're driving with a young child in the car seat, you stop the car, and if they're crying, you stop the car, you take them out of the car seat, you comfort them, you nourish them, you support them, you love them, you deactivate them for whatever reasons causing them to be upset, and then you put them back in the car seat. You don't put them in the driver's seat. You don't put your F state. Don't run your life in the F state. And by all means, don't push the send button on your computer when you're in the F state. You put technology on top of this, and we get F state upon F state upon escalated F state going on the internet every day. And it's destructive. Don't ever send an email when you're in the F state. Just recognize I need to come back. I need to give this thing overnight. Accept it, investigate it, talk about it, get some support with it. And then ultimately there's a non-attachment where you let it go. Okay, that's a simple process, which again, if we had more time, we'd spend more time with this. Safe relationships are predictable, consistent, and non-shaming. So we challenge each other. It's not comfortable, but it is predictable. Okay, be brave. Here's what I mean by this. Sometimes we hide to protect ourselves. If we don't feel safe in an organization, what happens, or in a relationship, it is very common to protect. If we're not feeling safe to be who we are. And here are some of the ways that we protect ourselves. And I know these within myself very well. Withdrawing, complaining, gossiping, staying busy. And I would put, along with staying busy, pleasing people, just being busy, pleasing people, taking care of people, fawning over people. Now, again, if I'm not suggesting that caring about people isn't a good thing to do, but notice what's driving that. Are you scared? Is it coming from fear? There's nothing wrong with building a good, successful business, but what's driving the success of that business? Are you driven by fear, or are you driven by service, by caring, by wanting to make a difference in the world? Or are you feeling insecure, and so you seek power to build that? Are you feeling a lack of safety in your life? I've seen lots of successful entrepreneurs who are hiding behind their success. And again, you can't tell that from the outside. We have to look in the mirror and get some very deep of reflection around what's driving the success in our life. And then the ultimate withdrawal is when we cross the line into addiction. I spend about 20 hours a week volunteering my time with addicts. And I understand that it's a coping mechanism. All of these are protective coping mechanisms in order to survive. Todd Herman talks about the difference between an owl brain and a wow brain. An owl brain it recoils from pain, avoids discomfort, is seeking security, versus a wow brain, which welcomes pain, welcomes discomfort, welcomes the sense of adventure. And if you're going to really create a safe culture, we need to keep developing. Some of us inherently have a kind of an owl brain that we kind of withdraw, and we have to access the wow brain. It's really a spectrum. It's not a dichotomy. We need to develop that wow brain within us that welcomes some discomfort, because this is where the growth lies. There's no growth inside the comfort zone. A lot of problems in the world would disappear if we talk to each other instead of talk about each other. And this is about having the courage to really start to face some of our fears. And it's what I call brave conversations, for want of a better word. And again, we could drill much more deeply into this, but a brave conversation, I'm just going to give you an example. These are examples of some values within a culture. And these are the values that you might claim to have within a culture. But folks, we all, when you face reality, none of us live up to our claim. You know, and I could use the example of health. We all probably on this call value health, but how many of you in the last week had every action in your life was completely aligned with your value of health? Now, why is that? Because you're unethical? Why is there a gap? Because you're unethical? No, because we're human. And it's not the gap that measures a safe culture. We think that we have to have the claim and reality completely together, that leaders have to perform exactly in alignment with their values. Now, if they don't have a commitment to those values, if they don't have a claim that they hold those values to be important, they should not work in that organization, and they should never be promoted. But assuming that they value those, but there's a gap. There's this gap between what we say and how we behave. And what's important in a safe organization is to start to have this, make that gap discussable. Let me know. There's no possible way. We have over 170 people on this call right now, and I might well say something. I have no intention on being disrespectful to anybody, but I don't know if some of the stuff I just blurt out and I just speak while I'm thinking, and I might well say something that somebody perceives as disrespectful. Well, I hope that I've earned enough trust with you that you'll stay on afterwards and at least address it with me directly, or at least email me if you feel more comfortable. Connect with me personally to say that statement was not, I did not find that caring. or that was not in line with respect. And let's discuss it. Let's bring it out into the open. As we say, sunlight is the best disinfectant. You've got to create a discussable conversation. They're not easy, but we have to make that discussable. And we have to have the courage to speak, to say, hey, that value that you espouse, it doesn't jive with the behavior. Can you help me understand that? And if we don't push our values, if we don't get to the point where we push each other on this, then those values are just they're just statements on a wall that mean nothing. This is how we actually use those values to build relationships. Now, I want to talk about being brave around responding in an unsafe environment, the authentic way. How do you be brave when you're not feeling safe in a culture? And it could be, some of your team members might be behaving in such a way that as a leader, you don't feel safe. But generally speaking, people don't feel safe when they're around a particular leader or sometimes a team member, a colleague. How do you take responsibility to deal with that the authentic way? So I'm gonna suggest 3 strategies. And then we're going to go through each of these strategies. Take hold of the sale, take a personal inventory, and courageously challenge the status quo. So let's take a look at holding the sale. This, some of you have seen me show this. This little poster here, actually it's a sign, was in my financial advisor's office. And it says, we cannot control the wind, but we can direct the sail. And what that means is the wind in your life, folks, is other people's behavior. And you can blame the wind, but I suggest you won't make a good sailor if you blame the wind. The wind is the behavior that other people are having. And I'm not denying that that wind is there. But what is the sail? That's the first decision. I'm going to decide to sail, to navigate my way through this windstorm. Because if you're in a windy environment, it's not feeling safe. It's up to you not to necessarily, you can't take responsibility for the wind. You can't make the wind different, but what you can is navigate it with a good sail. So that's deciding to direct the sail. Then you take a personal inventory. Now, here's what a personal inventory is. It's to say, whenever I'm not feeling safe, and this could be in a personal relationship, again, it could be in a work relationship, anytime you're not feeling safe, what am I here to learn? My experience is, and my premise and whole philosophy is life. Everything in life is here to teach us something. A life is a classroom. Adversity and challenges are your best lessons. So what am I here to learn in this particular situation? I'm not abdicating the fact that the boss, that you may have a very irresponsible, F-state driven boss who's creating all kinds of havoc in your organization. But there's something for every one of those team members to learn. Where have I met this before? Is this the very first time? It might be the very first time you've ever met an authority figure in your life who has been unsafe. But make sure you do a little checklist. It's an inventory. Where have I possibly met this before? What is stopping me from being courageous? What precisely are my fears? Am I afraid of getting fired if I stand up to this behavior? Now, am I actually going to get fired, or am I fabricating that? It's very hard to get fired. Ask any boss today how easy it is to fire somebody. We think we're going to get fired, and you might be afraid of being fired, but face and lean into your fears. What are some of your personal survival beliefs? Now, let me share with you what personal survival beliefs are. Survival beliefs are those things that we developed in order to survive in our formative years. We developed beliefs, and what happens is they exceed their function. So as a 5-year-old, I developed a belief that I have to please my parents in order to be safe. And so that was a survival that kept me surviving as a kid. But as an adult, I keep the same belief, and I've had to challenge that belief and come up with, I don't need to operate with that same belief anymore. Here are some 8 examples of survival beliefs. And again, in my longer term workshops, what we get into is how to actually change these beliefs. But the first step is to recognize them. Here's some beliefs. Trust no one, especially authority figures. They'll always hurt you. You have to please everyone in order to feel safe. I know that one well. You have to intimidate or micromanage others in order to feel safe. Intimidating, micromanaging managers are very often intimidating you because that's a coping mechanism that they learned when they were young in order to survive some kind of trauma or stress or some kind of event in their life, usually a series of events with somebody in their schools, their homes, their religious institution. I'm going to intimidate you as a way of managing my own anxiety. It's not safe to commit to relationships. Conflict is always hurtful. Many people are conflict avoidant because anytime they've ever had conflict in their life, it led to somebody being hurt. So I'm going to hold back. No one can ever see your weaknesses. Vulnerability is a weakness, so avoid it at all costs. And saying no, i.e. setting boundaries, means I don't care. So I'm always going to say yes because I always want to be a person who shows that I'm caring. These are examples of survival beliefs that you had, and there, you can come up with your own as you look back into your life. What was it that you had to do as a kid to survive whatever trauma or hardship or adversity that you went through as a kid? And where is that survival belief helping you today? And where is it getting in your way? You know, you can intimidate people. And I've seen intimidating executives that intimidate everybody, and they build a business out of that, and they leave a wake of disrespect. And people leave the organization continually, and they keep getting new people, but they keep building the business and they keep getting reinforced for that. So there's a good side to all of this, and there's a crap side. There's a curse to all of this. And what's important is to recognize, where are these a strength in my life and where are they a limitation? And then courageously challenge the status quo, which basically means find an ally. So don't ever try to change or not change it. Don't speak and be courageous around what's going on for you without support. Don't ever try to do this alone. And sometimes that accountability partner could be HR. You just want to make sure you're not doing this alone, folks. Honestly assess your standards and expectations. Am I expecting people to make this comfortable around here? And my boss is giving me feedback on my work that's not comfortable, and I'm labeling that as unsafe. Well, that's irresponsible. Don't use safety as a weapon to threaten people in authority when they're giving you feedback and helping you grow. And when you start to feel uncomfortable, I'm going to pull out this weapon of psychological safety. So just examine carefully to make sure that your standards and expectations are okay, and be direct, where you courageously go to people where you don't feel safe and say, safety is one of our values here, and I'm not feeling safe. Or simply say no to unrealistic or disrespectful expectations. So start to be direct, and there's no other way around this except to be direct. Now, if that directness gets disrespected, and if you get dismissed for being direct, then you go to a senior leader, to a leader above this. But don't go to blame the person. Don't go to point fingers. Do it with personal responsibility. Listen, safety is implied in our values. Would you agree? So you go to a senior leader in your organization and say, listen, safety was implied in our values. Am I correct about that? Yes. Well, I'm not getting safety expressed by my immediate supervisor. Can you help me understand what I might do differently to get a different result? And work from that perspective. What's my part of the problem? But be direct and be straight. Now, again, I'm probably being overly simplistic. I would welcome any of you want to contact me, and we can address some of these issues that might be going on for you specifically. And my last point, which is usually my last point, is we got to be kind in this whole process. Very few people wake up every day planning how they can make their environment that they lead an unsafe place. So I think if we really need to grant grace, most of the time we're around people when we don't feel safe. We don't feel safe because their behavior was a coping mechanism that turned into a survival belief. And in this civil society, I know there are evil people who are here to destroy us, but I'm going to suggest they're very rare. And most of the people in your organization, even if they feel it's very difficult. When people need to be connected the most, they push, and when they feel most insecure is when they push people away. So at least grant yourself and others some grace to say, we're going to do this imperfectly, and we're going to make incremental changes towards safety. But it starts with a little bit of compassion and understanding to recognize letting go of our judgment, because a judgment is another protective mechanism. We judge as a way of protecting ourselves from having to do the hard work of having those conversations. Okay. As you've said, if you've heard me before, many of you understand the relationship account that I got from Steve Covey, where you make deposits and you make withdrawals. We're not going to get into the details of what that means, but folks, just know, you can't make a withdrawal until you've made some deposits in any relationship. And just know that if you're in a position of leadership, you're automatically in the pink. You're automatically in the withdrawal, because people, very seldom have people had authority figures in their life, church leaders or school teachers or parents, extended family, some authority figure in people's lives where they weren't hurt. And so there's always a guarding when you're up against power, and not that positional power, positional leaders don't get more power, but they're perceived as having power in an organization. And you have to, that's why you make deposits. When you're a new boss, you come into a team, your first job is just simply to make deposits and earn that trust through deposit making, and primarily through listening. So folks, that's it for the day. That's it for the presentation. Next month, we're on December 20th at the same time. And the topic is unmasking leadership, navigating blind spots, and embracing self-awareness. And being as it's a holiday time, we're also going to have the presentation will have a lot. We're around a lot of family during this time of year, that time of year. And so you'll have a chance to examine some areas that will help you into your personal and family relations by examining and navigating your blind spots. It's kind of a continuation of what we've talked about today and what we've introduced today around psychological safety. So on that note, if you need any support in any way, I know Kristen will include my website, and I think Marg is on as well, my wonderful vice president of client care, who has my website. But feel free to reach out at any point. There's my email address. And for those of you who can stay around, I would welcome an opportunity to have a dialogue, questions and answers, responses to what I've said. And we are going to